Hello, hello, everybody. Thais Sky here. Welcome to Reclaim the Podcast. I am your host. Really looking forward to this episode. I interview my dear friend, Luna Love, all about what it means to be together in times of separation. We actually supported each other during both of our launches that we learned the day of was opened at the same day. And so we support each other through our launches, and we spend this episode just diving into what it meant for us to be supporting the other and the complexities of being together during a time where there's a lot of distrust of other humans. And I don't know if y'all are experiencing this, but a lot of jadedness with other humans, particularly humans that don't seem to have the same values as me. It's actually really hard to watch the news and listen to how our country is dealing with this pandemic. I just feel like better leadership would have really supported us in a different way to minimize the pain that this is causing so many of us. And so it's really hard. It's really hard when certain people in our country approve of the way the government is doing things, and the values clash, right? So we are in this together, and that's something that we hear quite often. We are in this together, but what does that really mean to be in this together? I don't know about you guys, you all, but I'm not really having it with these celebrities who are sharing how hard it is for them to be going through this, and that we are all in this together while they're sitting in their pretty mansions. Not to say that people can't have wealth and whatever, but it's almost like I'm not really interested in seeing that when there's so much other stuff, a lot of pain, a lot of challenges because of finances for other humans in this world. It's just not interesting to me. But then again, it begs the question of then what does it really mean to be together, particularly in this time of crisis and separation? And that is what Luna and I dive into. Luna, I actually had her she's my only returning guest besides my friend Lindsay Ray. Luna and I have a conversation, episode 19, about leadership. And this conversation is very different from that. So let me read to you Luna's bio. Luna is a truth-telling, shadow-walking, trauma-informed, nervous system explorer, woman of devotion. Right there. That says everything. I love that so much. She holds a master's degree in spiritual psychology and has been certified in various interdisciplinary healing arts and mystery school trainings. Luna's work lies at the intersection of exploring what it means to be both human and holy, welcoming the full spectrum of life, the agony, the ecstasy, and everything in between. In Luna's private practice, upcoming membership site, and international devotional community, Exalt, she centers the themes of alignment, embodied transformation, liberatory leadership, and service. Luna is devoted to social justice advocacy, working primarily in the addiction recovery and incarcerated communities through the integration of counsel work, spiritual psychology principles, and restorative justice practices. You can find more about her at lunaloveleadership.com, or you can go to the show notes and get the link to her website there. Looking forward to having this conversation with her, so let's get into it. Welcome to Reclaim, a podcast for women, by women, on conversations that matter. I am your host, Thais Sky, international speaker, teacher, and a certified life coach currently working to become a licensed psychotherapist in the state of California. Join me here every week as I offer thoughts and interviews on what it means to reclaim your humanness in this messy world. Hello, hello, Luna. Welcome to the Reclaim podcast for the second time. You are, I think, the only person that has come on the podcast more than once. So it's totally an honor. I know.
Oh, I'm honored.
So let's start with a check-in. How are you doing? How are you feeling right now?
I am good. I am aware. I'm feeling really inspired and motivated and clear and on purpose, and clear in not just how I feel inside, but clear in like my vision, like seeing things transparently, like unclouded in my vision. We're in the midst of this kind of like quarantining phase, and so I'm also aware of like my privilege and my longing to just like have tea and hug a friend that's not my husband, both taking up space.
Yeah.
Seeing both of them and also being like, I went to the farmer's market yesterday and a friend just like came up and gave me a hug. And I could feel everyone around us going, oh, and I was just like, oh, this is actually like, I wish I could have just like lingered a little longer. Like it was just the nicest thing. So just remembering how important that is and how good that feels, even though it's a lot of instruction for the opposite.
Yeah, it's very interesting this time, quarantine, holding both a suspicion for other humans and a coming together of other humans has been something I've been navigating, because on the one hand, there's all these statements of we're in this together, we're in this together, we're in this together. And there is such, like, my heartstrings get pulled every time, like, I see people in Italy singing, people in New York clapping, you know, seeing these heartwarming things that people are doing for one another. I get very moved by that. And so feeling that it's more than just this concept of we are in this together, but actually seeing moments when we really are in this together feels very heartwarming for me. And then on the other hand, I walk my dog and people will cross the street as I'm walking the dog, and it feels like disorienting, right? And I feel like, oh, I know this isn't personal, but I don't bite. Right. Like, why are you crossing the street? So I, again, of course I get it mentally why, but it's that push and pull between we're in it together and we're very distrustful of other people right now.
Yeah, I read something at some point. Who knows what I read, because there's so many things these days that I was occupied by, but about how our lack of empathy kind of started through dis-ease, about this idea that you could get sick from other people. And I forget the particular era in which this started. I think it's Paleolithic, like caveman kind of era. And that was like this like concept had never really crossed. It was just like, yeah, sometimes people got sick, but didn't really know kind of how it spread. Right. And then the kind of concept of it being through other people happened, and how that created this kind of like adverse reaction of fearing one another, and distancing and like separation, because the other person was like the enemy who could make us weak.
Right. I think that that's really interesting. And so then I wonder how that plays out in our interpersonal relationships from a very ancestral space of trust and distrust. What does it mean to be together during a time of separation? What does it mean to lean on each other while also not trust each other?
I have a lot of thoughts around like the political pieces of this on like the domestic and global agenda, as well as just like this being like a spontaneous virus thing. And like, without getting into any of that, I think that this is kind of a big, like, yes, it's happening and people are getting sick and people are dying. And it's a very interesting social experiment for powers that be to watch how humanity can be manipulated to do certain things through fear, and how separate we can be made, and how distrustful and how controlled we can be through media. Like, I notice things that are saying like this like script that I keep hearing is this person tested positive, but like nobody's talking about symptomology of all those people like testing positive. It's just this very intentional, media driven thing that is eliciting fear. And so how easily we can be made to distrust people, instead of like, for me, I'm a little bit more like, oh, I'm distrustful of the media. I'm distrustful of those different things. So it's interesting to kind of see how people navigate. And I think that's part of this, not that this is an experiment, but everything is an experiment. Like, everything in our lives is kind of giving us information and data. Yeah. And so whoever is collecting information and data, there's a lot here to like prove how humanity will relate to one another, to authorities, to different things, to themselves, to their bodies, to numbness, to like using time alone to go deeper into feelings and experiences versus like numbing. It's just, it's very experimental into like kind of observing the human psyche and nature.
Yeah, and I can't help but be thinking a lot about and making comparisons with Handmaid's Tale, just because, you know, that show became big. It became very popular. And I think particularly for white women, speaking as a white woman, seeing The Handmaid's Tale and being like, that is never going to happen. Like, yes, we live in a society where men and women, gendering, here binary, are not equal, but like that type of world, we're so far removed from that type of world, right? That was kind of my argument. And I'm imagining that's coming from a lot of privilege and not wanting to see a lot of things, right? And now going into a CVS and a grocery store and seeing everybody with the gloves and their masks, and it just is like, oh, actually, I don't think our society is ever that far from that type of dystopian future. And also, by the way, we're not that far from what that was in the past, at least in terms of slavery and separation and otherness. And so it's an illusion to think that that can't be our future. And also right now is an opportunity for us to really notice how we participate in that mentality that there's no way that we could live in a society that is so fear-based, when the actuality is we very much are living in that space.
I haven't watched that. It is really funny. I know.
What?
It's funny because my mother-in-law, she's a teacher. And so she just learned about Zoom, which we're on right now.
Yeah.
And I use all day long, all the time.
Yeah.
And she had like a family meeting with family friends, and everyone got together on the Zoom. And one of the questions was, what are you watching? And so everyone had a different show thing that they were watching, and they brought that up, Handmaid's Tale. And I was like, oh yeah, I've heard that was good. I should get into it. But I think it's like, the idea is like, it's not this dystopian future or this past. It's like, what are the ways in which that's happening right now, and how can we acknowledge it instead of like saying that our reality is not that way and different.
Right. Exactly. Thank you for saying so succinctly what I was trying to say. This is why I love you. Yeah. So, you know, and part of almost every story of overcoming in our past, present, and I believe will be our future, all of the stories of heroicism, all of the stories of change, of positive change, has very much been interpersonal, has very much been relationshiping and being together in relationships. And so how can we now, during times when we are being so called to separate and distrust and hoard, right, to take more than we need, how can we ground into the fact that it is being in connection, conversation, and in care of other people that we're going to get through this?
Two things come up. One is like where this conversation, our original intention for this conversation, was elicited from. In like us both having programs and launches that kind of went out, and having a whole beautiful back end of like, how are you? Mm-hmm. And like making the extra effort when you're in your own experience to check in with somebody else's experience, mm-hmm. and actually see how shared they are.
Yeah.
And I think in my work, there's like the two things that are the reality that I think are like the biggest like inefficiencies and like insanities in this world that I see is lack of grief literacy, mm-hmm. like willingness to look at death and loss, and empathy.
Yeah.
Lack of, just empathy and lack of willingness to look at death. And those two things combined, I think, are always in almost every predicament, our way in. Yeah. Like our way to solve the problems, because I think they're at the root. Like the more I look at all the problems, all the oppression, all the things, that's constantly where I come back to, is like lack of grief, lack of taking the time to
Yes.
grieve loss of culture, loss of ways of being that were once yours,
Yeah.
and loss of land, loss of like walking on place that your ancestors are, like all these things. When I look at colonization and slavery, all these different things, like I constantly am brought back to the many, many things in history that were ungrieved, that because of their lack of being grieved, um, repeated the pattern and
Yes.
projected that pattern of what we experience onto someone else. And I think it's taken us away from really identifying with the fact that like so many people, whether it's like we're both having a lunch and it's challenging, or we're both in this kind of COVID situation, or we're both experiencing whatever it is, we're both, not both, like everyone is affected by uh, being raised in an oppressive soup, right? Like, unless we acknowledge that we're having these shared experiences, empathy and like being willing to extend ourselves out beyond our own pain
Yes.
into this fact that it's a shared experience,
Yeah.
with different flavors and different tastes and different reasons why it's shared, but often, the human emotions are at the root the same. We've all experienced that grief and loss. We've all experienced that rage and anger and sadness and joy and celebration and ecstasy. Like, that's the core of it, is those are all shared experiences despite the reasons why those emotions are triggered. And when we can like come back to that and remember and connect with people from that place, it's so healing, and it
Yeah.
really does stop the patterns. And I think it's the empathy piece is somatic. It has to be felt in the body. Empathy of just the mind, of like, oh yeah, I can acknowledge someone's experience
That
without really
almost feels like pity.
without deeply feeling it, is not going to change. And I
Yeah.
change the pattern, change the behavior that's creating that
Right.
rift, that upset, that dissonance.
Yeah. I mean, you speak to a lot of different things, and I want to back up just a little bit because, when I opened the doors to this last cohort of Worthy Women Rise, I'm on Luna's email uh, distribution list. And so I had opened the doors, I had announced it to the world, and then I got an email from Luna saying that your program is now available and open.
And I got an email from a friend who has a similar thing saying this, like, my mastermind doors are opening the same day. It was
yeah,
like
so
amazing.
I reached out to you and I was like, oh my God, your doors are open, my doors are open. Let's, congratulations. This is exciting, holding space for you and that this launch goes the way you want it to. And I have to admit that I wouldn't have been able to do that just 5 years ago, a few years ago, even though we are friends and I quote unquote trust the abundance, I know for a fact that a few years ago, I would have seen that and I would have felt a threat, right? I would have felt now my launch is not going to be successful because now I'm competing, quote unquote, competing with Luna. And so that's why I was so like, oh my gosh, Luna, we have to have a conversation about this because this is an evolution of Thais right here. Like I saw it right in front of me where I actually was not only not experiencing competitiveness or lack or whatever. Not only was I not, but I also it felt so right for me to reach out and create a bridge between the two of us and go through this experience of the doors opening for our respective launches together. And that felt really important to me. And I know that part of what allowed me to create that bridge with you and to feel really connected to you during that time was because I have done the work of cultivating that type of empathy and a type of grounding in death and loss and lack and scarcity and the shadows of our world, to the point where that doesn't suffocate me and inform me and dictate my future. And so like that felt so powerful for me. I was like, oh my gosh, then we have to get on Reclaim and talk about this. And I now that was before COVID really came to the US and it became what it is now. So I think it's even more powerful in light of what's happening right now with the coronavirus, because right now it's the same thing that's happening where there's a deep fear and a desire to disconnect. But I also know for many of us, there's a deep desire to build bridges and to connect.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a shift in values too, for me, because I care about feeling connected to you more than I care about the success of my launch, which is a third of my income for the year. You know, like I'd rather, like it's, and also just for the audience, it's like, it's more than just an email to say, congratulations, hope it goes well. This was like a checking in regularly over the weeks, over the month and the weeks leading up to the start of our programs, to be like, how's it going? How are you? Touching in, temperature check.
Yeah.
Voice messages and like emotions and holding space for one another.
And vulnerability, right?
Yeah,
and
a lot of that.
This worked, this didn't work, feeling stuck here, feeling good here. It was a lot of honesty about where we were.
Yeah. And to me, in my experience, having enough, feeling blessed to have had enough connecting experiences like that have added so much more value into my life than the financial or professional or like feeling on purpose success of my business. Like to me, having those moments of interconnectedness in a real, authentic human way that is like non-competitive is so much more nourishing to my system than to feel like I gotta stay in my lane and I gotta stay focused and I don't have time for Thais and I don't have, you know, I gotta just do this thing and like I can't like stretch myself to get out of my zone to help Thais because I have my own stuff going on. I gotta stay focused and high vibe and blah blah blah. Like to me it's so much more, what gives me more value and what is more nourishing in my life is totally that interconnectedness. And I think we've been conditioned to like think, no, the productivity and the income and the things and the success in this like quantitative data based way is what like fills us up and makes us valuable, versus like, no, this qualitative experience of feeling nourished is so much more valuable to me than like what the numbers on paper might say.
Well, and again, like moving from the micro to the macro, the numbers of the economy feel to me like such unimportant numbers. And like the fact that, you know, we live in a system where it like most people do not have the capacity to save. This idea of like, you should save, like we don't have the capacity to save because we're not making enough. And then corporations, the same people who are judging individuals for not being able to save, they're not saving because we shouldn't, if everything were to shut down for a month, it shouldn't be the crisis where almost every single business is bankrupt, or, you know, every single individual is fucked. The fact that that is how it is right now tells us that our system is valuing the wrong things. And is not that measure of how the economy is doing, is not an actual measure of how the system is doing, how people are doing. And so it's the same thing. It's like, it's a value shift of like, you can either value economy and believing that business growth and unlimited growth is the way you want to lead your life, or you can be connections based and see value in relationship and change the way that we decide what is success and what is happiness and all of that.
Yeah, I like how you said focus on unlimited growth. It reminded me of this talk I went to with someone I just love, Stephen Jenkinson, who said the only thing that grows and grows and grows with no sense of its environment and impact and just grows and grows and grows is a tumor.
Is a what?
Tumor.
A tumor.
Like cancer is tumor.
Cancer. Yes.
Right. And that's like, humanity is so human centric that we're like, grow and technology and go to the moon and like expand that we forget that like we also exhale and we also like have the spaces in between the heartbeats and the breaths that are the contraction. And like everything in nature reflects that that oscillation of expansion and contraction. And like our culture is just go out, expand, go. and doesn't really take, and it's like the grief literacy, the death, the willingness to look at death. It's like there's no sense of like, oh, yes, we also have to have these contractions. And so then we get into these spaces where we're forced to be like put into these spaces to remind ourselves the value of the contraction state, and that it's not, we need both of them. You know, it's like there's the sympathetic nervous system isn't bad because it's fight or flight. It's necessary. It's valuable. We need that response. It's contraction. That's contraction. We need that. It's really valuable information for our lived experience. And if we're just limiting our lives to an experience that's penetrative and expanding outward, we're missing all this magic of void and contraction, and beauty that lives in the darkened states versus just the like solar.
And anytime you see the contraction in our culture, it's seen as bad, it's seen as wrong, right? That's where you're speaking about death literacy. Death literacy comes from a conversation, a dialogue, an attunement with death. If we don't have that, because we're seeing death as something that we have to prevent and fight against and deny, even though it's inevitable, then we literally don't even know how to navigate it when it happens, you know, and that's...
We're not prepared.
We're not prepared.
So anything in life that reflects that contraction, that death state, that void, we're not prepared. Like now, like we're just not prepared. And it's just having conversations, like you said, around what it means. Because if we're not using our, like for me, the whole point of life is to prepare for that moment. That moment of my death. Hopefully I'm like not in a crazy wild accident and I have a moment of consciousness, a moment of choice, a moment of surrender. And that I'm not like continuing to hold on to like thinking I like trying to make things different, trying to have a different reality. Like the whole point of life, my life anyway, I don't know what the meaning of it, but the meaning of my life is to use this time. It's like however many years, whatever it is, whether it's 38 or 85 years or whatever, that I'm using that time to prepare myself to consciously meet that moment. And if I'm not doing that, can you like, I mean, I've seen people die. And when that fear is there, it's so felt. And sometimes there's peace and sometimes there's gripping, and everyone's death is different. But I hope for mine to be that of a letting go, because I know what it feels like in my life today, now in my body, to hold on to something that is not what's actually happening, to want things to be different than they are, and to be so unwilling to acknowledge how they are that I create suffering for myself. And I just hope that I can learn how to get over that by the time that I die.
I think that's really powerful. Thank you for sharing that. You know, and something else that like this speaks to for me, going back to our ability to be able to hold space for the other in their good and their bad during their launch, speaks to, I think, a capacity issue, right? Our capacity to be able to hold space for the complexity of another without it then making meaning of our own experience, right? If I were to have had a really, really shitty launch and had leaned on you, capacity speaks to your ability to be able to grieve with me while also not expecting your launch to be doomed, vice versa. And so that is interesting to me, of like, how is that capacity built? Because so many relationships are really about limited capacity. I can only accept you in this limited way, you know, positive vibes only is a sense of that, or like be positive, don't complain, you know, kind of diminish all these parts of yourself. And, you know, I recently went for an interview for an opportunity. And I remember I was texting my friend, she's like, good luck. Like, you're going to do great. Just be yourself, you know? And I laughed and I was like, nobody actually wants me to be me, because if they really wanted me to be myself, then I wouldn't have all these neuroses that are trying to like, that I've learned since I was born to like diminish all of the wild parts of myself. Right. So that was a little joke, but it is true. We say that. We say to be yourself, but then most people, turns out, have very little capacity to let other people really be themselves.
Totally. Two things come up when you share that. One is my goddaughter is 5 and she goes to this Waldorf school and outdoor school. And one of the things that the teacher constantly says to the kids is, you can do hard things. Mm-hmm. Oh, it's hard. The kids are like, this is hard. And it's like, yeah, but you could do hard things. Mm-hmm. And I'll go to the park and I'll say like, I want to climb this thing. And like struggle. And I'll be like, okay, if you want to do it, like I'll tap a spot and be like, put your foot here. And then I'll just see somebody else like pick up their child and just like put them up on the higher level without any effort to like try the hard thing, to stretch our capacity.
Yes.
And now we're in this era where like everything is just accessible. Like we don't have to, like, I used to have to like go to an encyclopedia and look things up in a book, you know?
You have to go to a card catalog.
Like in the library, like totally. Like it's so easy, and like not like I'm all for efficiency, and like everything is so accessible that we're not like stretched to effort. Like technology can make things so easy that then we lose our ability to be masterful and stretch and learn something well and like give ourselves to it. And the other thing that comes up is intimacy, because I have these kind of 4 levels of intimacy that I work through with people. And the first one is just intimacy with yourself, being aware of what's going on. Thoughts, sensations, feelings, emotion, noticing, sensing, feeling what's going on. That's a level of intimacy that we have to have in order to then get to level 2 intimacy, which is, oh, I can allow myself to be seen in my intimacy by Thais, right? Mm-hmm. Like in whatever I'm experiencing, without changing, without pretending that that's not my experience, I can really allow myself to be seen. And then what you described is level 3, which is I can be with Thais's pain without leaving and losing myself.
Yes.
Without forgetting what I'm experiencing, without disacknowledging it, without numbing it. And so the thing is, you can't skip around those. They have to be developed in order. You can't get to level 2 without level 1. You can't get to level 3 without level 2.
Sure.
And so it is it's a capacity, it's a cultivation.
Yes.
But it starts with, am I present and aware and acknowledging and accepting of what my experience is right now? Because how could I possibly be with what you're experiencing and not lose myself if I haven't established that foundation?
Yes.
So I think it's one, raising our kids to be able to believe, and like re-raising ourselves to remember that we can do hard things, even if it stretches us, and to start with the foundation, because we really have missed them.
Yeah.
And that creates dependency. And I think our culture is kind of, maybe, I don't know if it's done on purpose or not, but it's this, that when we have all these, like, when we don't make a place for people to stretch and people to effort and everybody gets a trophy just because you tried, like, kind of style, we really limit like that effort, and it makes us dependent. It makes us dependent upon like somebody telling us what to do, and these, like, because nobody's thinking for themselves and nobody's really like, oh, if I'm in a tough situation, I know how to get, like, for me, I have freaking skills, like more than most people who live in the United States and cities. Like, if something happens, I trust in my ability to get food, start a fire, build a shelter. Like, I know I can do all of that, and I'm not waiting on someone to tell me what's the next thing I should do.
Right.
And I think that self-sufficiency and like knowing I can't do everything myself and having your tools and your skills and this person's skills together is going to make it way better. But knowing that I can think of the next thing to do and feel confident in my ability to execute it without being dependent upon someone telling me what to do, without needing my phone to look up a YouTube video to figure the thing out, you know, like being learned.
Yes. And I think when we're talking about emotional literacy, where I see this playing out a lot, is something just happened to me. and now I need advice from 5 of my friends before I know what to do about it, right? And so there's a sense of like wanting that connection and wanting to understand self through the lens of other that, you know, comes typically from a childhood where we weren't really reflected, and so the only way we learned about ourselves was through others. But you know, now again, it's a capacity issue. Can we expand our capacity to be with the discomfort of not knowing what to do, and not knowing what how other people are going to perceive us, and how other people are going to respond to this dilemma? And the more that we can expand this capacity to be with all of our uncomfortable things, like what we're saying and what you're saying, Luna, in the steps, is the more then we can grow into a level of intimacy where we can then seek support without losing our own understanding and our own kind of truth of the matter, right? So there's a difference between, I don't know what to do with my launch. I'm just using this example because I think it really grounds us in the conversation, right? I don't know what to do with my launch. I panic. I reach out to Luna. Luna, tell me what to do. She tells me what to do, and then I do that thing. Versus, I don't know what to do with my launch. I sit with it. It feels really complicated. I feel really uncomfortable. I sit with that pain. I reach out to Luna. I let her know I'm in pain. She witnesses me in my pain. And in that, I figure out what to do next.
Yeah, exactly. You know, reel me back in, Thais, if I'm going too tangential. But I've listened to a number of conversations that you've had and were having a lot when you started school around the difference between coaching and psychotherapy.
Yeah.
And I think that, like, in the beginning, coaching has a lot of variations and tendrils now, but coaching is very much like telling someone what to do,
right?
In a way, and like, okay, you're going to do this thing 5 times a week, and like, we're going to practice this thing. You're going to change this habit, and in its original kind of form, as we kind of grew into knowing about it, it has a lot of different incarnations now. And then, like, more analysis psychotherapy is like, interesting. Mm-hmm. And like, I think it's really the marriage, right? It's like, for me, my work is called mentoring and mentorships, because it's really about, like, you know, the answers. It's helping someone to believe that they know what's true for them, and not giving the answers and being like, I don't know, how does that feel?
Right.
Okay, what does that feeling inform you of? And then what does that information guide you to do next? And like, you know, supporting people in cultivating their own choice making capacity, I think is really what it's about, versus like telling someone what to do, or like it all just being information without the guidance on how to implement and use that information and bring it into our lives to give us the next step.
Yes.
And so I think that, like, your work and your background also values that and kind of has that marriage, and, you know, you having literally two like paths of your work, being on both of those things. It's like you're learning so much from both, and they have to influence each other. And to me, when they influence each other, I find myself in this place that it is about empowering people to remember that they have the capacity to problem solve, and to feel so deeply that feeling becomes information. Like we were talking before about the empathy. When you feel deeply enough, it will naturally transform your actions and behaviors.
Yes.
If it's just information, it's going to be hard to elicit change.
Yeah.
Because it's not integrated into the body, into the behaviors, and it's not just an idea. And so when we really deeply feel our feelings, and the feelings of others, and trust that we have the capacity to do that, then we are able to we don't have to think about, how do I change the behavior? The behavior naturally changes when we empathize.
Yes.
And if we're not really deeply feeling our feelings, like our own pain, like really, 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 like for me, if I really sit with the depth of my own pain, it's so hard to then be mean to someone, because I know what it feels like, because I'm willing to feel it.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, how could I possibly create that experience for someone else through my own unconscious triggers and patterning, if I'm willing to feel it. If I'm willing to feel it and I feel the amount of excruciating pain that lives inside those wounds, how could I ever repeat that behavior and create that experience for someone else?
Yeah.
So that's why empathy is so important. And that's also why it's so hard, because nobody wants to feel that stuff.
Yeah.
Because we also believe I can't do it. We believe I'm going to die. I'm going to get lost in this hole, in this abyss, get swallowed in the quicksand. I can't do it. Instead of like, yes, you can. You can do hard things. You can feel hard feelings, right? We're not kind of conditioned in that way.
We're not conditioned in that way. You're speaking my soul language. This is why I adore our conversations, because we're so in tune, and it's so wonderful. I know I've said this to you before, but hearing you talk, it's just so wonderful that like when I read your thing, the way you speak in your Instagram posts, and you know, the language that you use is so uniquely Luna, and it's so not uniquely Thais, you know. Like you and so I just have so much like, this is an incredible person who is so Luna in the world and has such this way of presenting in the world. And then I have, you know, my own way of presenting, which I know is very much not Luna. And yet we come together in this such a beautiful marriage. I love it. I love it so much. Everything you're saying is just like stirring up so much yes for me. And I'm just, as you were talking, I was just imagining like, you know, when we start the journey, it's like we're carrying around a teaspoon, right? And we're trying to catch snowflakes with a teaspoon. And that's our capacity to feel hard feelings, you know, and each snowflake is a hard feeling, and we have like very little capacity, and it's very hard to even try to catch the feeling. And then once you catch it, it's like, oh my God, you know, that's it. You can only land pretty much like one snowflake in there, and like that you're tapped out. And then like, as you move through the levels of intimacy, I love that you painted that for us. And like, as you do the work, as you ground into your feelings, it's like you're now carrying bigger and bigger containers. You know, and pretty soon you have this like huge, beautiful like walk, you know, and you're catching so many more feelings, and each feeling is informing you. It's grounding you. It's attuning you to what's happening. You're not responding and reacting. You're letting it catch. You know, you have this beautiful container to catch all of these snowflakes, and not a single snowflake really affects the walk, really affects the container. And that is the delightful goal, to the point maybe that when you die, you have caught all of the snowflake, like you're just so settled in all of that holding that you can now move to death in a way that doesn't feel like a threat to self, because the self is just in the catching.
Right. Yeah, I think there's, I've been writing about this a lot yesterday, in the last few days. This idea of like life, like my life, like I own my life in some way. It's just like amusing to me, like, oh, it's my life and I have to do something with my life and my contribution. And while yes, we're all these like beautiful snowflakes and individuals, it's really like, it's so not my life. Like it's just life. It's just death. Like it belongs, like I will be consumed by that death. It's not mine to hold on to. And I think we're so conditioned to be individuated and to make our mark and be unique, and like and there's a beauty and a value in that. And I think it's also this, I'm not even going to go there, but it's specific to a very mixed culture place that we grew up in, like the United States or other colonized places where there's like a lot of different, like when I go to places in Europe that aren't major cities, like everyone's just that culture. Like they just,
yeah,
there's the sameness, there's a sharedness, there's like a uniform, okay with not having to go against the current. Like everyone can just go with the current, because like, I think it's very much a part of how we're raised in the West and in the United States because of the mixed melting pot to like individuate and express ourselves, and also because of so many cultures that have been taken to like feel so individualized. But there's such a beauty with just like remembering yourself as a part of the whole.
Yeah.
As like being a part of the sea that is life, that is death. And it's not like, oh, it's mine and unique and special. Like, yeah, it is, of course. And also, it's just like that has to dissolve at some point. And I think that's what we really long for.
Yeah.
Is that sense of like the dissolution of the separation of other. Like I'm different and I'm myself and you're this. And all of that separation, like when that goes away, we experience this union, this magic, this like really I think like sexual ecstasy too, like that space where like there's no sense of like separateness or other. It's just like, wow, those when if you're blessed enough to have one or three of those moments in your life, it's just or all the time, amazing, because I think that's really like freedom. It's like what we really 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 long for, and yet we're so trying to create separation.
Yes.
Constantly.
Yeah, and I think that really speaks to what we're being called to right now as we physically distance from people. Why are we physically distancing ourselves from people? I mean, the very act of physical distancing is an act of love. Seeing streets being empty is an act of reverence. We are holding people who are most vulnerable with so much tender love by our sacrifices of not going to a restaurant right now or a movie theater. And that has so much grace in that physical distancing. And so that physical distancing, right, is a way that we ground in our togetherness and in the fact that we are all belonging to each other when we are protecting each other and thinking of each other and being in that sense of care with one another.
And I think it's a choice because, yeah, not everyone are doing the distancing. And not everyone's doing it from that beautiful place that you spoke of.
Yeah.
And so you're going to have a different experience.
Yeah.
And it's a choice to choose to do it from a place of like, wow, this is protective and this is care and this is tending and this is beyond me. Or from the place of like hoarding toilet paper.
Right.
And like you're going to have a different lived experience. And I guarantee those will inform your dying moments. Not like that memory of those specific things, but the living of life in that way will affect your ability to really let go when it's time to let go or not.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a really interesting point in time where I think it forces us to stop being in denial in some ways about systemic issues. It's not like this is all new, nothing that we're experiencing, I think, is new. I think we're just in such a more extreme environment that things are seen more. And for some people that feels new. But we really are being invited to step into what it is that we want to be living for and dying for, and what does it mean to expand our capacity to be in this togetherness and in our own unique lived experience.
I'm curious.
Yeah.
See how it all plays out in the length of my lifetime and potentially my children, to see how much we're in our mid-30s and just talking about how the difference of being a kid and looking up in the encyclopedia and the big set of 50 something books and today, and just wow, it's just a short period of time, and how much things change in that short period of time, and what's ahead, and it's just totally unknown, and that's the beauty of it. It's the unknown, and can we shape it and surrender to it at the same time? Can we be engaged in creating what it is, and also surrender to the fact that it is unknown and we don't know what's going to happen, and allowing that to be okay and take up space in our experience.
Yeah. Oh, I feel like this is a beautiful place to wrap up this conversation. It just went by in a flash. And for those of you listening, if you enjoyed this conversation, then you'll probably enjoy the first conversation that Luna and I had together back in January of 2018. So I'll link that conversation. It was episode 19. I'll link that in the show notes. So if you did not get enough of the two of us talking, you can get more there. Any final thoughts? Anything else you feel called to share before we say goodbye?
Just that I said it before we got started. I just love our conversations. There's at least one on my podcast too, and others that we've had recorded over time that are not.
We've had many conversations recorded.
Yeah, in courses. And,
yeah.
Facebook Lives and lots of stuff, and they're always really inspirational for me and evocative and revelatory, and I really enjoy the way that our organisms communicate.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
So
well, you're welcome, Luna. Thank you for being here, and I'll talk to you soon. Thank you for listening to Reclaim the Podcast. This podcast represents the opinions of Thais Sky and her guests to the show. The content of this podcast are for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional psychological, psychiatric, or medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified mental health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or mental disorder.